Welcome to the Wealthy Life Podcast. I'm Sybil Verch, and today we're exploring a topic that affects every one of us. And yet it's something many people don't think about until a crisis occurs. And that's the connection between brain health and financial well-being. Research continues to show that our cognitive health impacts everything from daily decision-making to retirement planning, fraud prevention, and maintaining independence as we age. Joining me are two exceptional guests. Neela White is a certified professional consultant on aging, an elder planning counselor, a certified dementia care provider, and is passionate about helping individuals and families understand the importance of proactive planning for life's uncertainties. And Dr. Allison Sekuler is one of Canada's leading experts in brain health, aging, and cognitive neuroscience. Her scientific work has helped us better understand how our brains change over time and what we can do to support long-term cognitive wellness. Welcome to both of you. It's a pleasure having you here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to kick it off with my favorite question, and we'll start with you, Neela. What does living a wealthy life mean to you?
I think that's a big question, but I think from a personal point of view, I would say it's doing everything that you possibly can do to maintain your autonomy, maintain your independence, live a stress-free life as much as possible, preserve your dignity. And I think with all of those aspects rolled into one, it's a pure gift of love to those around you who are going to support you towards the end of life or when a crisis occurs. And I think it's also one of those things of once the planning is done, the wealthy, rich life becomes everything is behind you and planned. You can move forward with such freedom.
Oh, that's beautiful. Dr. Sekuler, how about you?
I would 100% agree. I think that a wealthy life goes so far beyond just the size of your bank account. It's investing not just in your bank account, but investing in your health, in your independence, in your relationships. At Baycrest, our vision is for a world where every older adult lives a life of purpose and fulfillment and dignity. And to me, if you can get there, that really is having a wealthy life. And I think that what goes misunderstood a lot of times is that brain health is really one of the most valuable assets that we have. And it's one that we don't always think about until something goes wrong.
Yeah, isn't that funny? We don't think about our brain, and our brain is doing the thinking. We'll talk about that.
Meta.
Neela, how did you get into this field? What inspired you to focus on this as a specialty?
I think it's sort of twofold. I was a wannabe doctor and I didn't get into med school after a couple tries. So it was always this idea of helping people from a health perspective and also tying into the financial aspects of how do you maintain your dignity and preserve your wellness through finances. And the other aspect, which really honed it down into specializing more in aspects of dementia and cognitive decline, ended up being when my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's and my mother diagnosed with early onset dementia, that it became really apparent that there has to be a real understanding of the need for funding, personal funding, to be able to make those choices that preserve our dignity to as biggest extent possible.
You know, I think that's so common when any one of us goes through a difficult situation or a time in our life. That definitely piques the interest to know everything you can about that particular situation. I'm dealing with something similar with a family member. I've got friends with family members that have been diagnosed with dementia. And wow, have I done a ton of research on that since then. And there's still more to know, which is what you guys are going to provide today, which is great. Dr. Sekuler, let's talk about cognitive health. Sure. What does that even mean?
I mean, cognitive health is how well you can function in the world, how you can remember things, you can use your language, emotional control, planning, all of those sorts of things. And one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that cognitive health is not fixed at birth. It changes throughout our lifetime in different kinds of ways. It gets better as we get a little bit older, and then as we get even more older, some elements of it are naturally going to be getting worse. So it's natural for people's memory, for example, to get worse as we get older. I can't remember everybody's names as well as I could. I sometimes walk upstairs and I forget, why did I go upstairs? And, there's normal changes in our cognitive health, but dementia is not necessarily part of normal changes. Dementia is caused by diseases of the brain. It's neurodegeneration. And that's where you have to get into this a little bit more fine-tuned about cognitive health that's normal aging versus the neurodegeneration that we see with dementia.
And how do you know the difference? Like, how do you know if, geez, I have a shower in the morning and I can't remember if I washed my hair because I'm thinking of something else, which may be normal, versus, I'm losing my marbles.
Yeah, inattention can be a big factor in all of this, and especially for women, as you know, you hit your 50s and beyond, and you've entered menopause. There are all kinds of symptoms that you see as your hormonal levels change that can actually also change your ability to remember things. You've got the brain fog that can come in, and there are other things. It could be you've got a vitamin B deficiency or something else. So there's all sorts of reasons that you might not remember. Did I wash my hair, or why did I go into the room? It's perfectly normal to forget where you put your keys once in a while. Where it becomes a challenge is when you forget what the keys were for, right? Or you find your keys in the refrigerator, and that can happen because people don't sort of realize where things ought to be going. So it's when you're starting to feel that something is really significantly different with your memory, or your personality shifts in a significant way, or you've got visual or hearing changes that were sort of suddenly coming on, then it's really time to get that checked out with a physician or a medical professional. Because if you feel like something's wrong, you've really got to trust yourself.
Right. And I think a lot of people are afraid to go ask for help. Maybe they don't want to deal with what the outcome of that ask may be. Maybe head in the sand is sometimes better than knowing, but I think knowing earlier, there are things you can do to improve it, correct?
Yeah. I think head in the sand is never better, frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
I think head in the sand means you're avoiding something that you should know about. And as I mentioned before, if you have a vitamin B deficiency, it can cause cognitive decline. If you have depression or sleep apnea, those can all lead to changes in your ability to remember things, for example. It's not dementia. And it's reversible if you catch it early enough, right? So there are those sorts of changes in your memory that if you catch it early enough, there's absolutely something you can do about it. And then there's other sorts of changes that may be related to dementia, but even if you catch it early enough, now if it's Alzheimer's and you catch it early enough, you may be eligible for some of the drugs that have been approved recently that can slow the progression of the disease. And there's other treatments coming online. And there's even things that we can do in everyday life. At least 45% of the risk factor for dementia is related to things we've got some control over in our lives. So things like your sleeping and your eating and your exercise, controlling your heart health, social engagement, cognitive engagement, hearing loss, reducing smoking and drinking. There's all these different things we can do to decrease our dementia risk. And the sooner we know that we're maybe at risk or an elevated risk, the more incentive there is really to start to take some action to slow that decline.
So don't ignore
it altogether.
Don't ignore it.
Absolutely don't ignore it.
And don't assume it's the worst. I think what I got from you out of that was it could be something as simple as just a vitamin deficiency.
Yeah.
It could be a hormonal imbalance. These things are easy to fix, and then you can feel your best again.
Yeah.
Now, Neela, I'm sure in your dealings with family members and clients and their family members, it must come up, how do you have the conversation in the first place? Like if you notice somebody is a little bit off and you're concerned, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, you know, this the whole conversation is so stigmatized and it's so emotional that everybody thinks that it's best just to avoid it or try to do it without the guise of, hey, we need to actually be prepared for when incapacity or something happens. I think really it's important to stress that it's so important to have it before the diagnosis and before the crisis, while the person can make their own decisions, while the decisions aren't made under duress or stress. And I think also while the person has capacity, right? There's this fine line of deeming the loss of capacity, then trying to make these adjustments, these changes. So I think that conversation has to happen for any competent adult. And then, you know, if it hasn't happened then and there is a diagnosis, I think it really is helping them understand what the possible trajectory, prognosis, and cost will be, and breaking it down into little pieces with what's important. Talk about your values, what's important to you. Start off with the heartstrings, the emotional things, and then move to the administrative things.
Well, you talk about cost.
One thing I would just add, sorry, to that is part of that discussion is helping people maintain control. That's one of the things that they're most afraid of, is that they're going to lose control over the situation. And the earlier you can have those conversations, the more it gives them the ability to assert their own control and to stay in control.
Oh, that's such a good point, because everybody does want to maintain control as long as they can. And so if you make those decisions and have those conversations with family members, you're at least still in control of the future as best you can be. So Neela, you're talking about cost, or you mentioned cost, what the cost will be. What are you referring to?
So it could be a number of things. I mean, most Canadians, when they're surveyed, they want to age in place no matter what's actually happening. Well, that doesn't come with a zero price tag. So, there's home modifications for your own personal safety and to support your independence. There's possibly the chores. Let's say you become unable to cut your lawn, shovel your driveway, cook, clean. What is that cost going to be just to be able to exist in your own home? And as anything accelerates or progresses, what happens when you actually need care with, activities of daily living? What price is there? And who can actually fulfill the duty? I mean, the assumption is, oh, my kids are going to take care of me. They'll come and do it. Well, your kids have their own life and have their own fiscal responsibilities. So there's the whole aging in place, and then sort of beyond that are sort of the next two thresholds of retirement living. Maybe you decide, I can't manage in my home, but I'm not ready to make the leap. Plus the idea of, are you going to get into long-term care is a whole different discussion. But retirement homes come with a sizable bill, so you have to make sure you've budgeted. And then obviously sort of long-term care, when it's 24-hour care that you need, it's not about the cost necessarily of long-term care, it's accessibility. And if you can't get in, what is your gap plan, basically?
Right, that's an important point. I don't think most people realize that you can't just show up and get into a long-term care facility tomorrow. There's wait lists in a lot of them. And so if you're hospitalized for something unrelated, maybe you just don't leave the hospital and that's your holding ground, or you're at home and maybe you can't be at home by yourself and bringing in care, whether it's family or paid care or a combination. Yeah, there's a lot to think about there financially. So what can people do to prevent cognitive decline? What can they do to keep their brain as healthy as possible for as long as possible?
Yeah. So I like to use the acronym BRIGHT. Just to help people remember the things that they can do. There's actually many, many things that you can do, but BRIGHT highlights the key elements. So B is for moving your body. So we know exercise is really important. R is for rest and resilience. You want to make sure you're getting the right sort of sleep and you're reducing your stress as much as possible. I is for involvement, both social involvement and cognitive involvement. It turns out that being lonely, chronically lonely and socially isolated is a huge risk factor for dementia. And there are ways that we can address that, obviously. So that's moving your body, rest and resilience, involvement, socially, cognitively. G is for glasses and hearing aids. Hearing loss globally accounts for about 7% of dementia risk, just in and of itself. And then if you add in uncorrected vision loss, that's another couple percent. So making sure that you not only are having your hearing tested, but if you need hearing aids, wear them and use them. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have them and just say they're a pain and they don't use them. That's the other thing. And then H is for heart health. If it's good for your heart, it's going to be good for your brain too. So you want to reduce the risk of diabetes, of stroke, high blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol. Anything that would be helping to reduce your risk for heart attack or stroke, et cetera, is going to be helping your brain as well. And then T is toxins. You want to avoid alcohol. You want to avoid smoking. And you want to, as much as you can have any control over it, avoid air pollution, which is increasingly becoming a problem with global climate change. But there are things that we can do in each of those cases to help us live a bright life so that
Yeah.
we can decrease our dementia risk.
That's a helpful acronym to remember. When I think about the hearing loss and vision loss, maybe you could expand a little bit more on why that affects our brain health.
Yeah, there's a couple of different reasons people think, and one is that the vision loss, for example, may be a sign of dementia itself, certain kinds of dementia, including Alzheimer's, because we know that there are changes in the retina that happen in the earliest stages. So people are actually using changes in vision, including in my lab, we've got some tests that we're developing, and even just pictures of the back of the eye may be an early sort of sign that in 10 years, maybe you're going to have cognitive issues. But on the other side, it also can be that if you can't hear something and you can't see something, it's harder to process information, right? So if you think about it, if you need glasses and you put butter all over them and you take your glasses off and you try to read the newspaper, it's very difficult. And so then think about all of the extra work your brain is doing to get the information in there. And now you've got to also try to remember it, and you've got to also attend to things. And studies from our lab showed years ago that as we get older, the brain is naturally sort of recruiting different parts of the brain to help it with things like vision. And it's sort of stealing, if you will, from the memory areas and the attention areas. So if you're using, the memory areas just to see or just to hear, it's not going to be as available for you when you actually need to remember something or attend to something. So this is, an issue for people. There have been studies showing if you just have older people make sure they have the right prescription, all of a sudden their measured IQ, their performance on cognitive tests goes way up because all of a sudden they can see better. So there's stress that you're putting on the brain when you can't hear. And the other thing is that if you can't hear, for example, or you can't see, it's going to make it less likely that you're going to do a lot of the other things that you need to do to stay brain healthy, including going out for lectures, listening to podcasts or watching podcasts, exercising. If you can't see so well, you might be afraid you're going to fall. And so maybe you don't go for as many walks, or you don't go to the gym, or you don't socialize. So you end up getting, a double whammy, if you will, from these sensory reductions in terms of your ability to live a bright life in many of the other ways.
So they're all connected.
It's all interconnected, yeah.
Just going to ask Dr. Sekuler, is there any testing we can do? I've been doing a lot of reading about blood tests, and also are there any supplements, omega-3 or vitamin D? There's tons of literature on that now.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature. There's not a lot of really well-designed studies that have the right kind of controls in place. It's one of the things that we're working on right now at Baycrest to build up that literature. There are blood tests that are out there. So people might have heard about these new blood tests that can detect different kinds of proteins in the brain, and Alzheimer's in particular is associated with a buildup of certain kinds of misfolded proteins in the brain. The problem is that those tests are not meant to be used right now as the sole method of diagnosis. Very often people will have these proteins building up in their brain and they will not develop dementia. So it's almost like, everyone, you might have a gene that's related to a heart condition. It doesn't mean you'll have that heart condition. It just means maybe you're more likely to develop it. You're at higher risk. So we can't diagnose dementia or even Alzheimer's with a blood test right now. But if you've gone through the other kinds of cognitive testing and you have a diagnosis of dementia, it can tell you, is it Alzheimer's? So that's where there's a little bit of subtlety there. It may be in 10 years, we'll have a different answer for that. But as of right now, just knowing that you've got a buildup of proteins in the brain does not mean you will have dementia down the road. It is a sign that you may be more at risk. And then maybe you should be thinking about, what can I do to change my lifestyle so that I can reduce that risk?
But be careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
So if you get a blood test done, it may spot that you're higher risk, but it doesn't mean you'll get it. So
exactly.
You got to balance out whether that's going to create more anxiety for you or not. You talked about an eye exam or eye testing, that they can see things in the back of the eye.
Yeah. So one of the companies, I run the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, and one of the companies that we've supported is called ReadySpec. And in that case, what they've done is they've created a method using artificial intelligence to be able to, when you go to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, often they take a picture of the very back of your eye. And there's changes in the eye that can predict who is, again, at risk for Alzheimer's disease because of just how the blood is flowing and other kinds of buildup of proteins in the eye. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds of these early tools for diagnosis that we're starting to see just getting developed now. There's a lot more testing that needs to be done. But it's a really exciting area right now.
I think it would be because, as you mentioned earlier, the sooner you know that something is declining, then the more intervention you can have and hopefully prolong the implications of that.
Yeah, yeah. And if you can decrease the or delay, if you can delay the onset of dementia for people by just 1 year, like we could see a reduction by 2050 of the number of people with being newly diagnosed with dementia of 500,000 people. So, you know, for each person, the more you're delaying it, A, the better your quality of life is, but B, for society as a whole, having to deal with all of the growing numbers that we're expecting to see. Right now, there's about 770, almost 800,000 people living with dementia in Canada right now. And by 2050, if we don't do anything, it's going to rise to about 1.7 million.
Wow.
So society's not ready for this, right? It's as anyone who's had to, you know, be a caregiver or has been living with a disease itself knows this is an impact not just for you personally, but for the whole of society. So the more we can do to decrease the numbers of people who are getting diagnosed or at least delay the onset, the better it will be for our healthcare system as a whole.
Now, we talked a little bit about the risks and the negative outcomes from cognitive decline being costs, one of them, Neela, costs of getting care, aging in place. We didn't really talk about fraud protection or prevention much, but maybe one of you could share your thoughts on that.
Sorry, I'll take that one first, I guess. I think period, there's a whole vulnerability with scams. And obviously, I think as we age and if there's a disease that's affecting our ability to reason things out, obviously the risk becomes higher. And I think it's really making sure that the people who are supporting somebody with a diagnosis does have a second set of eyes, that there's this whole susceptibility to clicking on links, scams, and scammers now are becoming so aware and pulling at the emotional heartstrings. So, it's romance scams, it's grandparent scams. Generations tend to be trustworthy of their bank, of CRA. So there's all sorts of scams involving that where we're rule followers by nature, that we are tempted to click on the link because we don't want that brown envelope sort of thing. So I think it's really trying to raise awareness, do more education on using safely email, using safely the internet, having that second set of eyes. And it doesn't mean that whoever's your power of attorney for property or your kids or support network has to have full transparency on your finances, but I think that they need to have a second set of eyes, possibly on where your accounts are, any sort of changes in behavior with suddenly you're on the internet 24/7 and you're writing to this new friend, of being curious on who are the new people in your life and what are they about, and just picking up on conversations with, Amazon's coming to my door every day and dropping off a package. Well, what did you order? What did you need? Well, I needed this, and being able to identify, well, you already have 2 or 3 of mixer, blender, whatever it is. So I think it's picking up earlier on cues that could actually signify that there's actual scamming happening, which has huge financial consequences, right?
Yeah. And sometimes being victim of the scams is an early indicator. The scams are getting really, really sophisticated, I have to say. But if you're falling for the scams more, or as Neela was saying, have changes in your purchasing sort of patterns or investment patterns, those can be early signs of cognitive change. And the reason that, dementia or other kinds of cognitive impairment may put people more at risk is because, again, yes, there's memory, but there's also the rational thinking, decision making, being able to, balance the judgment around things and plan. All of those can be affected as we're getting older, just in general, and then double that if it's somebody who's living with a neurodegenerative disease. And so it's really, really important to be aware of what the different scams are. And if you are just in general asked to do anything that is really, really urgent and you have to give money, take a beat. If you've got someone else you can ask that person for their advice. They're trying to rush you into making these decisions. And so the best approach is usually to say, okay, I'm going to take some time. And one of the things is just also to be aware that there's these new scams now where they will do something that's almost sort of obvious that it's a scam. And then they'll call you back and say, we're the fraud department. We've identified that there was a scam. We need all of your information to make sure that you don't get robbed. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the scam now.
Yeah, I know.
So, being aware of what these different, scams that are out there now is really important, but just not rushing into anything that has financial consequences. And even if it's just $10 or $20, it can then grow and grow. So if someone's pushing you to make a financial decision, just say, I need time to think about it. Whether it's a real decision or not, that's usually the best advice.
I think also it's really important to share these experiences.
Yes.
People don't want to admit that this has happened because they don't want the judgment of, well, how dumb, how stupid, or anything like that. But it has nothing to do with that. It just
Yes.
really has to do with a trusting nature and lack of knowledge in a specific area. And, our ability to share it with our cohort, with our community, I think it just helps prevent it, because it just doesn't happen to one person in isolation. Out of a
Yes.
group, probably many people have received the same email, but some reacted, some didn't. So I think knowledge is awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you're
good
100%
point.
right. If you don't share it, we
Yeah.
don't know what the scams are. I can tell you, I'm not going to name names because they don't want to be named, but a lot of, lawyers, physicians, professors who have fallen for these scams and they don't tell anybody.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so then you do have the sense that, oh, well, there's something wrong with me if I'm falling for the scam. No, it's happening to everyone. They're just not talking about it.
Yeah, and I think people get embarrassed. So let's normalize the conversation.
Yes.
I think pretty much everyone has fallen for some type of a scam or a scam attempt at some point. They've clicked on a link that they shouldn't have. But talk about it. And then having that second set of eyes, like whether it's your spouse, your partner, a close friend, a family member, and just slow down. Learning about it, slowing down, talking about it, it all helps.
Yeah.
And then being
And I shouldn't say this, but
mindful.
my mom actually, she torments the scammers because she learns what all the scams are. And then she will string them along and sort of have them waste all of their time.
She
takes joy in that.
I know there's quite a few people who like doing that and they have fun with it. But here's something she needs to be aware of is then they're recording your voice. And then
Yes,
they use
yes,
your voice
yes,
with AI to then have you call a family member to ask
Yes,
for
yeah,
money. So
yeah.
it's better to just, not engage whatsoever.
engage. Yeah.
So Neela,
Or use a fake voice.
yeah, I know. Yeah, use a fake voice. So Neela, let's talk a little bit about some of the things people need to ensure they have in place now while they're healthy and their cognitive function is normal.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I think the first one and most important, and it's coming up more and more, is a trusted person. And I think having that trusted contact is so important. That way, for our industry, we have somebody to call to say, have you noticed any changes? It doesn't reveal any financial information. It is just almost like a wellness check. So I think that's really important, because oftentimes when we're experiencing an issue or a decline, we may not be aware that we're experiencing that decline and think that everything is par right now. So I think that's the first thing. I think definitely having in place your power of attorney for property, your power of attorney for care, because anything can happen at any time. So those documents need to be in place so that somebody can act on your behalf and be your voice. So I think that's very important. Wills. As long as you have any amount, or even just with decision making, you need to be able to have it written down and documented, have it there. I mean, right now, 50% of Canadians don't have wills. And when we think about the whole idea of burden, what is it to not be a burden? Let's think through that and answer the questions of having my affairs in order, have my powers of attorney in place, have my will in place, have a trusted contact. Start having those discussions about legacy planning and gifting and donating. That way it doesn't come as a surprise when something happens. So I think
That's
those
good.
are really important documents and conversations to have while you have capacity and competent. That way, when stuff starts to happen, everyone heard the same thing.
That's great advice. And do it now. Don't
Yeah.
wait. Anybody who's listening to this, don't wait. Appoint a trusted contact, have a power of attorney, medical representation agreement, and have your will done. Because you
Yes.
could get bonked on the head tomorrow.
That's right.
You could be in a car accident. Anything could happen. You could get stranded on a beautiful desert island somewhere, enjoying the good life, but meanwhile, you can't handle your financial affairs.
And I think
So
it's
get
just
that done.
reframing that conversation, that it doesn't mean, let's get rid of the superstition that by putting those documents in place, that means something's going to happen. That would be like saying, when I buy a lottery ticket, what are my chances of winning? Yet mentally, I've planned for the first 3 things I would do with the $70 million. So let's restructure how we're introducing these as a gift of love to the people you love, right?
And you mentioned conversations. I think having conversations with your family about that as well, so that they understand. I mean, so my parents are doing that right now. They're updating all of those documents, and they've asked me and my sisters to look over the documents now so that we know, A, what's in them, but what is missing. If we were actually going through the exercise of, oh, now we have to deal with this, is there information that we would find useful that they didn't think about including?
That's really a good
it's really useful to have those conversations early.
Yeah, because once you've been diagnosed with dementia or unfit to make those types of decisions for yourself, or you lose your own signing authority, or maybe it's just even you're temporarily in a coma or temporarily stranded on that desert island and nobody can reach you, that's when those documents come into place. And you can't do them after the fact. You need to do them now. Is there any question I should have asked and I haven't?
One thing I want to make sure people know is, that there are ways of checking in on your own brain health. So you mentioned having a stroke or being in an accident, as well as obviously, dementia, which we've been talking about. How do you know whether any of those kinds of things have impacted your memory or your attention? Baycrest has a free online test called Cognicity, which is COGNICITI.com. I do it every 6 months or so just to make sure I know what's my baseline brain health. And again, it will go up and down because maybe I had a flu, or maybe, I'm a little bit low on vitamin B or whatever. But if I'm seeing it go down, 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 and I'm worried about my memory, then it's time to go and see a doctor. So, we get our eyes checked regularly. We get our, if you're a woman, you might be getting mammograms on a regular basis. And so why not get your brain checked on a regular basis too? So that would just be one of the things. And it's free. And we also have a free online hearing screening test. We were talking about hearing before, which is, takes 5 minutes. It's not to diagnose a hearing loss, but it can give you a sense of whether maybe you should get a further assessment and do something about that. Because again, hearing is one of the most important things that we can do to decrease our dementia risk.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been great. I love that there's a free tool out there. Neela, is there any tools or free resources you can think of that people should have access to?
Actually, Raymond James itself has a organizational tool that they've put together in collaboration with Baycrest. So I think that's fairly handy. Also, when we think about conversations and how to get started, putting that first foot forward, Advanced Care Planning Canada has some sort of great conversation starters, mini guides that you can download and just, have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine with, oh, wait, no wine, no alcohol. Have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and just start that conversation. And I think the third point of that would be also just, you could be the most organized person, but make sure somebody knows where all those really important documents are. Make sure they're not hidden. Make sure they're quite visible. That way, when somebody does happen, somebody in an emotional crisis now having to deal with you is not struggling to search for all of these things.
Yeah. My father and mother just showed me, here's where the documents will be, pictures in the house so that I know exactly, like, if something were to happen, I hope it won't. We know exactly where those documents will be. And the other thing is just, we do have a podcast ourselves called Defy Dementia, which is just one word, defydementia.ca. You can go and find all of those resources. And if we went too quickly through some of the ways of decreasing your dementia risk, you can find all of it on our website and on the podcasts and infographics and videos.
Oh, this has been so insightful. Thank you both. I now have a clear understanding of brain health and its impact on your financial plan and your finances, and what we could do to prevent it and keep control. Take control of your own situation. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. We so appreciate your likes, your follows, and your shares. And would you like to get in the best financial shape of your life? Check out our new 90-day financial boot camp called FinFit 90. Details at thewealthylife.com. As always, please seek independent professional advice before taking action. We are here to provide information to help you learn and ask the right questions to make smart decisions so you can live the wealthy life.